40 years is a long time to bury a secret, but the jungle keeps time differently. It hides, it rots, and sometimes it returns what was taken. The camera was not supposed to be worth anything. It was old, battered metal and leather, a relic more at home in a flea market than at the center of a mystery. The shutter was stuck. The leather strap had rotted into a frayed tangle. Someone had buried it shallow, half under roots, half under a red clay that the monsoon season had baked into brick. A local farmer found it. By accident, it was the wet season, and the farmer's ox had pulled a plough wide of its usual furrow. The plough snagged on something hard, and the ox stumbled. When the farmer knelt to unstick the blade, the ground gave with a sound like old bones. He dug with a knife and his bare hands until he unearthed a black rectangle of metal and glass dot. Inside film, the farmer, who spoke 2 words of broken French and only a handful of English, wrapped the camera in a cloth and carried it to the nearest town. Word moved faster than the heat that day. An image of a rusted camera, and the man who carried it made it to a traveler's phone, and then, by midnight, to an email in a London inbox. That email landed on the desk of Anna Reid, a documentary filmmaker who specialized in cold case journalism. Anna had spent 10 years following disappeared people in war zones, most stories with endings that never came. The photo of the camera made her stomach drop. If you've spent your life looking for lost things, a camera is a promise. Not because the metal matters, but because someone once recorded life through it. Anna financed a cheap flight the next week. She paid for a local fixer and a translator. She paid in cash for a taxi with broken springs that coughed along an unpaved road and hauled her into the foothills where the plough had dug the camera free. The place looked like a photograph: red earth, enormous trees, vines like knotted ropes. Here and there, a clue, a shoe sole clenched in mud, a scrap of cloth twisted round a root. The veterinarian at the town gave them a shoulder shrug and a plastic cup of tea. But the local police, finally roused by the image on Facebook and the courier's insistence, boxed the camera, labeled it evidence, and a small team of officers took Anna's passport number and her word that she was there in pursuit of someone who had been missing for decades. Anna would later say, the camera looked like it had been hurriedly hidden, not buried in ceremony, more like it had been shoved into the earth and left to the elements. That meant one thing: someone had been in the jungle with it recently enough to put it there, or else someone had returned to the place where it lay, dug it up, and then resealed the ground. The timeline blurred the moment it crossed human hands. The film inside was in a small canister, a curl of black gelatin that, to the casual eye, looked like a dead insect. Anna remembered how film behaves. It holds light like memory. If it could be developed, if it could be coaxed awake, it would speak in frames. For someone who studies disappearances, film is the truest kind of witness. It doesn't lie. It simply shows what someone was willing to point their eye at a conservator. In the capital agreed to take the job. The canister was flown overnight beneath plastic wrap and sedation. The kind of travel that makes people nervous because film hates temperature and clumsy hands. When the lab technician opened the canister, the smell carried the years old. Blue, wet earth, the faint chemical temps of a life left standing. They sent the negative to a dry room. They transferred it onto a high-resolution scanner used for historical negatives. For 2 days, a small group of people hovered like fishermen around the glowing screen. The first frames were a blur: light sky, hands. Then faces began to stitch themselves into the sequence. And the faces were not anonymous. They were unmistakable to anyone with a passing knowledge of a certain era. A young man with a lean jaw and hair that fell the way celebrity hair did when cameras began to record not only asterisk faces but stories. He was handsome in the careless way of people who inherit stages and scripts. He carried the small, purposeful look of someone studying light, a man who had come to the jungle not to hide, but to witness. His name was Elliot Hale, the kind of name magazine editors put under headshots. He was the son of a household name in Hollywood, a man whose very lineage carried more light than the places Elliot chose to go. He had traded movie sets for conflict lines, trading scripts for documentary notebooks, and he had gone missing in a country that would not forgive the soft footprint of a Western traveler. No body had been reported. No last radio call that made sense. Elliot's family had exhausted channels and time. The world had moved on. The world always moves on. But when Anna held the first, still on the screen, and saw his eyes tilted toward the camera, she felt the small, flat shock of recognition. That starts a new case. He didn't disappear from the movies so much as he stepped off them and walked into a country that was already mid-collapse. The camera suggested he had wanted to look harder and then was forced to keep looking from a new kind of distance. Frame by frame, the negatives stitched a thin narrative. Elliot in a riverside market, laughing with a local fixer. Elliot with a notebook, scribbling numbers. Elliot at the threshold of a ramshackle building, pointing his lens as if to catch the exact expression of a world that moved in danger. Then a set of frames that stopped being reportage and started to become intimate. A man filmed in a twilight room, his silhouette lit by lamplight, his hand smoothing the leather strap of a camera. He looked tired. He smelled of diesel and cigarette smoke, the scent of long road ends, the final frames, the ones Anna could not stop returning to, showed the camera itself. Someone, from Elliot's point of view, filming a rough ceremonial. Clearing in the jungle, men with machetes, bundles of cloth, a stretch of ground that had been freshly scraped. A hand passes across the image in a motion that is almost gentle and then not. The camera is set down. The frame holds. The light shifts. The screen goes to black dot. Anna turned the volume up because she needed proof beyond a photograph. Audio engineers managed to extract a hiss, then a whisper of words in a language she couldn't pass, and beneath that, a voice that was English, low, quick, and panicked. The technical transcription read later as a fragment. "We can't. Leave it. Not now. The men say they'll come back. I will hide the camera. It'll tell." Then a scrape, the shutter sound, and silence. This was where the case split. Not legally, not yet, but morally. A Western man had been in a place where local actors were not props. He had recorded something he thought might matter. He had hidden the camera. And someone, whether conspirator, rescuer, or owner of bad intent, had buried it and walked away. The question now, the one Anna would spend the next days asking in markets, police stations, and among veterans of the conflict, was the simplest and the oldest. Who else saw what Elliot saw? Because film is stubborn. It keeps whatever you pointed the lens at, even if you can't deliver yourself from whatever followed. 40 years later, a farmer's plow had scraped that stubbornness free. A camera is a promise kept across decades. And from the first frame to the last, Elliot's camera promised one thing: that someone had looked, that someone had seen, and someone, somewhere, had wanted that view buried. The rain in Phnom Penh that summer came down in sheets, soaking the narrow streets and filling the air with the heavy scent of wet earth and exhaust fumes. It was June 1974, the final year before Cambodia would be swallowed completely by the Khmer Rouge. And somewhere in this boiling cauldron of political unrest and simmering danger, American actor Michael Raines was last seen alive. Witnesses recalled the day with unnerving clarity. It was just after 2 p.m. when Michael was spotted sitting in the shaded corner of a tiny riverside cafe, his leather satchel at his feet and his battered Nikon camera on the table. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, sweat glistening on his forearms. His eyes locked on the Mekong River, like he was waiting for something or someone. A young waitress named Chenda would later tell authorities he was different that day. He wasn't smiling like before. He kept glancing over his shoulder, like he thought someone was following him. This matched what several locals claimed. Michael had been moving with a sense of urgency in the days before his disappearance. He was known in the neighborhood as the friendly foreigner, always chatting, always taking photographs of everyday life. But now, his easy charm seemed replaced by something else. Quiet paranoia. A conversation that changed everything, according to a now declassified State Department report. Michael was overheard speaking in hushed tones to another foreigner. A man described as tall, bearded, with a British accent. Some said they argued. Others swore they exchanged envelopes. One fisherman sitting at a nearby table claimed to have caught fragments of their conversation. You don't understand. If these photos get out, it's over for them, and for me. No one ever identified the bearded man. His existence remains a ghost in the story. One of those puzzle pieces that might explain everything, or nothing at all. The market incident later, that same day. Michael was spotted weaving through the crowded stalls of the central market. Vendors remembered him buying rolls of film from a French merchant who supplied foreign journalists. But something strange happened there. An older Cambodian man approached Michael and, without a word, pressed a folded note into his palm before walking away. The actor froze for a moment, glanced around, then stuffed the note deep into his pocket. Minutes later, he left the market without making another purchase. No one has ever found that note. His final hours in Panam Panaz night fell. Michael returned briefly to the small guest house where he was staying, a colonial-era building with faded yellow walls and creaking floorboards. The owner, a wiry man named Mr. Somnong, recalled seeing Michael packing hurriedly. He told me he might leave tomorrow, but his hands were shaking, Somnong said years later. I asked if something was wrong, but he just smiled, the kind of smile that hides fear. Before leaving, Michael locked his satchel, slung his camera over his shoulder, and said in perfect, rehearsed Cambodian, "Thank you for everything. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me." It was the last confirmed sighting of him by someone who knew his name. The journey into the jungle. What happened next comes only from fragmented witness accounts, and they don't all agree. A group of local men claim to have given Michael a ride south toward Kampot province. They remembered the foreigner paying them in US dollars, asking them to avoid the main roads and stick to back routes. One of them, a teenager at the time, would later say, he kept looking at the tree line. He asked about soldiers, not government. Soldiers, but the other ones, the black uniform ones. The black uniform ones were the Khmer Rouge. By sunrise the next day, the group said Michael was dropped at a small riverside dock. From there, they saw him board a long wooden boat with two other passengers, both Cambodian, both silent. The boat pushed off into the misty water, its motor coughing, disappearing into the green wall of jungle. The unsettling discovery today's Later, a tattered piece of clothing washed ashore, miles downstream. A beige shirt with a missing button. Some swore it looked exactly like the one Michael had been wearing, but no one could be certain. The war was escalating. People were vanishing every day. By July, Phnom Penh itself would be encircled. Why was he there? The question that has haunted Michael's story for decades is why. What was a rising Hollywood actor with a promising career ahead doing in one of the most dangerous countries in the world at the height of its political collapse? Some said he was chasing a role in an upcoming war film and wanted authentic research. Others believed he was secretly working with journalists to document the atrocities the world wasn't yet seeing. But there's a third theory, one whispered, among a few who knew him closely, that Michael had stumbled onto something he was never meant to see. Something his camera had captured that made him a target. A photograph surfaces in 1985, more than a decade after Michael's disappearance. A photograph appeared in the possession of a Cambodian refugee living in Paris. It showed a group of villagers standing near a burned-out truck on a jungle road. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was the blurred profile of a foreign man with a camera. Some insisted it was Michael. Others dismissed it as coincidence. But for those who had searched for him for years, it was the first shred of possible proof that he had made it deeper into the countryside before. Whatever happened, the sisters searched back in Los Angeles. Michael's younger sister, Claire Rains, never gave up. She traveled to Cambodia twice. First in 1992, after the peace accords, and again in 2001, when she received a letter from a former soldier claiming to have seen the American. Each time, she returned with more questions than answers. But she kept every scrap of information, photographs, market receipts, scribbled directions from locals who claimed to remember him. It was during her third trip, in 2014, that the breakthrough came. In a remote village near the Vietnamese border, a farmer told her about a foreigner's grave somewhere deep in the jungle, marked only by a rusted film canister nailed to a tree. The camera in the earth what Claire eventually found after 3 days of trekking through tangled vines and choking heat wasn't a grave at all. It was a shallow pit, hidden under decades of leaf litter. Inside, wrapped in rotting canvas, was an old Nikon camera. Michael's camera, its leather strap stiff with age. The film inside was damaged, but not destroyed. Those rolls would later reveal the final photographs he ever took, blurred. Images of dense jungle paths, shadowy figures, and something else. Something Claire could never bring herself to describe in interviews. Claire's discovery didn't bring closure. If anything, it made the mystery even darker. Because if the camera had survived, why hadn't he? The sun was dipping low in the Cambodian sky, casting long, amber shadows across the narrow dirt roads that wound into the heart of the jungle. By late afternoon, the sticky air had become almost suffocating. Mosquitoes whined in the background, and the smell of damp earth and foliage was so thick. It felt like breathing in a living thing. This was the last place the Hollywood actor and the small crew with him were seen alive. Local accounts from 1974 describe a small convoy of 2 jeeps and a motorbike heading down an overgrown trail, the kind of road that vanishes entirely during the rainy season. The crew had told the villagers they were headed for the old temple ruins, a location that didn't appear on any tourist maps at the time. It was a place whispered about only in hushed tones, a crumbling sanctuary deep in the jungle, swallowed by nature and long abandoned after the war. The actor's driver, a young Cambodian man named Dara, had warned them, "The road is not safe after sunset." Many people, they don't come back. But the actor, charismatic and fearless as ever, had laughed it off. His hunger for authenticity, for shots that no other film could capture, was greater than any fear of danger. And so, just before nightfall, they disappeared into the trees. The first signs that something had gone wrong didn't appear until days later. The production team back in Phnom Penh realized they hadn't received the expected radio check-in. At first, they assumed a broken transmitter or a delayed shoot. But by the fourth day, unease began to turn to panic. The studio contacted the authorities. A small search party was formed, mostly locals, a few journalists, and one government soldier to keep order. But the jungle here was not like anywhere else. The trail was narrow and twisted, and in many places, the roots of ancient trees had completely split the path into fragments. Even the air felt heavy, as though the jungle itself wanted to keep its secrets. Then came the first chilling discovery. A local tracker found one of the jeeps, abandoned. The doors hung open. The windshield was cracked. In the back seat, film reels were strewn across the floor, soaked and ruined by moisture. There was no sign of the crew, no footprints in the mud except for those of wild animals. What puzzled the trackers most was how abruptly the trail seemed to end. The tire marks stopped, as if the vehicle had been lifted away or vanished into the trees. The motorbike was gone entirely. Rumors began to swirl almost immediately. Some whispered that the group had stumbled into the territory of Khmer Rouge rebels. Others said they had been captured by smugglers using the jungle trails to move stolen artifacts. And then there were the older villagers who believed something far darker had happened, that the crew had disturbed something in the ruins that was never meant to be found. Whatever the truth, the official search lasted only weeks. Funding dried up. The war was escalating. And in the chaos of Cambodia in the mid-70s, a missing film crew, even one with an American star, was soon overshadowed by far greater tragedies. The actor's family, back in Los Angeles, refused to give up. They hired private investigators, ex-military trackers, even a retired journalist who had covered the Vietnam War. But one by one, those who ventured into the jungle returned with the same story. The trail went cold, the forest closed in, and it was as though the earth itself had swallowed the missing men whole. For the next 40 years, the only thing that remained was the mystery. Until one humid morning in 2014, a farmer digging near the roots of a massive strangler fig unearthed something strange. A rusted metal box, its hinges sealed shut with decades of mud and vine growth. Inside was the camera, but the film inside, and the images it held would tell a story far stranger and far darker than anyone could have imagined. The box was heavier than it looked, its metal edges eaten away by rust, and the air around it seemed unnaturally still, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. The farmer, a quiet man named Saka, had no idea what he had found. He thought, at first it might be an old ammunition case left behind from the war. But when he pried it open, the sight inside stopped him cold. A camera, not a modern digital one, but a battered 16mm motion picture camera, the kind used in the early 1970s. Its leather strap had rotted away, and mold crept over the lens. Yet somehow it was intact, and beside it, wrapped in decayed cloth, were 3 film canisters. Saka didn't dare touch them. He had heard enough stories from his grandfather about cursed relics dug up from the wrong places. So he did the only thing he could think of. He carried the box to the village elder. Word spread fast. Within days, A foreign journalist who had been living in Phnom Penh caught wind of the find. He immediately recognized the significance, the make and model of the camera. The initials scratched into its side. JR, it matched the one carried by the Hollywood actors' crew before they vanished in 1974. By the time the box reached the capital, a small group had formed: journalists, historians, and a film preservation expert flown in from Bangkok. The canisters were carefully transferred to a temperature-controlled case. The film stock, astonishingly, had not disintegrated entirely. Humidity had warped it, fungus clung to the edges, but enough of the emulsion remained to possibly reveal images. The restoration process took weeks. Each frame had to be cleaned by hand, then digitally scanned, and as the first few minutes of footage came to life on a flickering monitor, the room fell into complete silence. The opening shots were ordinary enough: dense jungle canopy, sunlight spearing through the leaves, the sound of cicadas rising in the background. The actor, smiling and shirtless under the humid heat, waved at the camera as he crossed a shallow river. His voice, warm, charming, called out to the unseen cameramen to keep rolling. But then the tone shifted. The footage became shakier, the breathing of the cameraman more urgent. There were shots of Dara, the driver, pointing off screen, his face tense, muttering in Khmer. They had reached the ruins, dark stone towers strangled by roots, faces of forgotten gods staring out from moss-covered walls. And then came the first strange thing: a figure, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, tall, motionless, watching from the shadows. The camera lingered for only a moment before panning away, almost as if the crew didn't want to acknowledge it. As the reel progressed, the tension was unmistakable. The actor's smile faded. He was filmed arguing quietly with someone off-screen, gesturing back toward the jeeps. But instead of leaving, they pressed deeper into the ruins. In the last minutes of the first reel, the crew entered a narrow stone corridor. Their flashlights illuminated carved walls, scenes of sacrifice, warriors kneeling before something enormous and inhuman. The air seemed to shimmer with dust, or perhaps something else. Then, without warning, the footage ended. Screen went black. But there were still 2 more reels, and if the first one hinted at unease, the next would descend into something far more disturbing. The boat's engine growled low against the quiet hum of the jungle as Samira, David, and Saka drifted deeper into the Tonle River. It was a ribbon of silver cutting through the dense green. But here, far from the tourist trails, the water felt less like a passage and more like a living entity, dark, deep, and watchful. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the banks. Trees leaned over the water as if eavesdropping, their roots twisted and skeletal, gripping the muddy edges. A lone kingfisher darted across the river ahead, its wings flashing like sparks of sapphire in the gloom. Saka kept his eyes forward, one hand on the tiller, his expression unreadable. Samira noticed his knuckles tightening round the handle. Every time the boat groaned over a hidden current. "Why does it feel like this place is avoiding us?" she murmured. David glanced at her, puzzled. "Avoiding us, like it's warning us," she said, her voice barely above the hum of the motor. Saka didn't look at them, but his voice cut through the mist. "This part of the river, locals call it Tonel Priash Mo, the river of ghosts." Samira leaned forward. "Ghosts, as in not ghosts, like in your movies," Saka interrupted. "Here, it means the river holds the spirits of those who died here, and many have." The boat's wake curled and lapped against the shore. From somewhere deep in the jungle, The long, low call of a gibbon echoed a sound both haunting and beautiful. It was nearly midday when the jungle canopy shifted, letting shafts of sunlight slice down through the mist. That's when Samira spotted something strange ahead, a cluster of rotting wooden stakes jutting from the riverbank, tangled in vines and moss. "What's that?" she asked. "So owed the boat, an old landing from before the war." David leaned over the side, taking in the blackened posts. Could this be where James Harlan's trail ended? Saka shook his head. Maybe, or maybe just another ghost from that time. As they edged closer, Samira noticed something caught between the posts, half submerged, waterlogged, and swaying with the current. She reached with the boat hook and pulled it aboard. It was a faded, torn satchel. The fabric was almost black, with age, but a faint stamp was still visible. JH in worn gold lettering. Her heart lurched. David's voice dropped to a whisper. James Harlan. They opened the satchel on the boat's floor. Inside, everything was ruined by time, and water papers melted into pulp. A rusted fountain pen and a broken pair of sunglasses. But one item survived. Wrapped in waxy oilcloth was a small notebook, its pages swollen but intact. Samira carefully peeled it open. The handwriting inside was jagged, hurried. The first few pages were dated July 1974, months after Harlan was last seen in Phnom Penh. David read aloud. "They are watching me, even here, in the jungle. Sotkam and his men move at night. They say it is safer, but I hear the drums." Another entry. "We crossed the river." Sotkam spoke to a man in whispers. He handed over something in a wrapped bundle. "I didn't see what it was. I think they know I am not here for the same reason." And then the final legible words before the ink dissolved. "If I do not return, the camera." The sentence ended. Abruptly, the rest was lost to the river. Samira's pulse quickened. The camera. He must have hidden it. Saka studied the notebook silently, then looked up. "I think I know where this was written." The boat nosed into a narrow tributary, branches scraping the sides like fingers. Hours seemed to pass as the jungle closed in tighter, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay. Finally, the waterway opened into a small inlet, and there, on the far shore, half swallowed by the jungle, were the remains of a set huts on stilts, bamboo walkways collapsing into the mud, fishing nets dangling like cobwebs. No birds sang here. The air was still. Samira stepped onto the spongy bank, her boots sinking into the damp soil. Every step felt like trespassing. "This place," David whispered. "It's like it was abandoned in a hurry." Sucker nodded grimly, because it was. They moved through the ruins, searching for any trace of Harlan. Samira's eyes caught a faded photograph nailed to a hut wall. 3 men, standing knee-deep in the river, holding a massive fish. One of them, she realized with a jolt, was James Harlan. His hair was longer, his face gaunt, but the smile was unmistakable. David scanned the ground. If Harlan was here, maybe he left something behind. In the largest hut, they found more clues: a rusted tripod, scraps of film reels, and a military-issue canteen with "US" stamped into the metal. Then, in the corner, beneath a collapsed mat, Samira's hand brushed against something solid. It was an old, leather camera case. She opened it with trembling fingers, empty. Her breath caught. H was here, but the camera's gone. Before they could search further, Saka froze in the doorway, listening. "What is it?" David asked. "Engine," Saka said. Sure enough, The distant thrum of motors rolled across the water, faint but growing. Samira's stomach twisted. Who would be out here? Soka's face darkened. Not anyone you want to meet. They moved quickly, slipping back into the boat and pushing off just as the sound grew louder. Through the trees, Samira glimpsed another boat, with 3 men standing on deck, their silhouettes sharp against the haze. One of them held a long, glinting object, a rifle. Saka cut the motor and let the current take them around a bend. Hidden by the overhanging branches, the other boat slowed at the settlement, its crew stepping onto the bank. "They're searching," David whispered. Saka kept them drifting, his eyes locked on the water ahead. "We don't stay here, we move now." They didn't stop until the last trace of daylight bled from the sky. The river turned black, reflecting only the thin crescent of the moon. They tied up to a quiet bank, far from any signs of life. Couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the boat, staring into the dark water. Somewhere down there, the camera Harland wrote about might still be waiting, a time capsule of whatever he'd seen, and whatever had cost him his life. David joined her, his voice low. "You know, if we find that camera, we might find more than just answers." "What do you mean?" "We might find something people have killed to keep hidden for 40 years. Samira shivered, but not from the cold. The jungle around them was alive, with nocturnal sounds, frogs calling, insects buzzing, the distant splash of something slipping into the water. And in the darkness, the tonal sand seemed to whisper, carrying secrets only the river knew by morning. They would push deeper into the jungle. By nightfall, they would be closer to the truth and to the danger James Harland never escaped. The second reel had been haunting enough. But the third was where the footage seemed to abandon all reason. What it revealed was not just the end of the journey, it was the slow, agonizing unraveling of everyone involved. It begins with night. The screen is almost completely black except for the flicker of orange light in the distance. The camera moves closer, through tall grass swaying in the wind. The sound of insects loud and chaotic dot around the campfire. The crew sits in a loose circle. The Hollywood actor, once a symbol of confidence and charm, now looks gaunt, sweat dripping down his forehead. His shirt is torn, his trousers muddied. Beside him, Dara keeps glancing into the darkness, clutching a rifle. The others avoid speaking above a whisper. Suddenly, there's movement beyond the firelight. A faint shape slips between the trees, too far to make out clearly, but the camera catches a glint. Something like eyeshine reflecting in the flames. The crew freezes. Someone off-camera mutters in Khmer. The actor's voice, low but steady, says, "Keep filming. If we disappear, someone has to know." The statement sends a shiver even through the present-day viewers in the restoration lab. It's as if he knew, in that exact moment, that they were already too far gone. The footage cuts. Now the camera is handheld, swaying wildly, the image shaky. The crew is walking, or rather, stumbling through thick undergrowth. Flashlights slice through the darkness, illuminating flashes of pale stone here and there. Rain is coming. Down hard, hammering the leaves overhead. They're following Dara. He says they can't stay in one place for too long. The jungle, he insists, is not empty. Not tonight. Every so often, the microphone catches a sound, a deep, slow rhythm, like breathing. Too heavy to be human. The actor asks, almost demands, to know what Dara sees. Dara doesn't answer. He only quickens his pace. After several minutes of chaotic walking, the group bursts into an open space. Lightning briefly illuminates it, a massive courtyard paved with cracked stones, surrounded by looming temple walls. At the center is a circular depression filled with black water. Carvings cover every surface, serpents twisting around human forms, faces with mouths open wide in screams. The rain makes everything shine, the stone looking almost alive. The crew sets up a makeshift shelter beneath one of the temple arches. For a moment, it seems they might rest. Then the camera picks up something faint, a movement in the water's surface at the courtyard's center. No rain should cause ripples. Like that, they spread outward in perfect concentric circles, as though something just beneath was moving. Dara tells everyone to avoid looking at it. The actor doesn't listen. He steps forward, peering into the water, and then the camera shakes violently, not because of the operator, but because everyone is shouting. Something white, almost hand-like, has broken the surface before vanishing again by now. The footage shows exhaustion and paranoia settling in. One of the crew, a sound technician, refuses to go any further. He sits down, head in hands, muttering that they are off the map and off the plan. The actor tries to rally them, saying they've come too far to turn back without finishing what they started. His tone is not arrogance anymore, it's desperation, the voice of a man who has tied his fate to finding something. Another argument breaks out. Someone swears they've seen the tall figure again, watching from the archway. The camera swings toward it, but there's nothing there. Only wet stone and darkness. Dara says they will move again before dawn. Nobody sleeps. When the reel resumes, it's early morning. Fog curls around the ruins, softening their edges, making them seem less like stone and more like shapes from a dream. The camera is almost steady again, as if whoever is holding it has resigned themselves to whatever comes next. They're moving down a long causeway lined with crumbling statues, each one headless, each one with its hands pressed together in prayer. The air feels heavier here. Even in the restored footage, there's a strange dimness, as though the sunlight itself has been muted. Halfway down the causeway, the actor stops. The camera zooms in on him. His expression is unreadable, part awe, part fear. Then he says, quietly, "We're not supposed to be here." The final segment of the reel begins without warning. The crew is now underground. Their flashlights sweep across walls, carved with more figures. But here, the images are more violent, almost frantic. Hands pulling at bodies, faces stretched in agony. The camera catches pools of water, deep and black, scattered along the stone floor. The sound of dripping echoes like a clock ticking down. Then voices, distant at first, then closer. They are not speaking any language the present-day viewers recognize. It's rhythmic, almost a chant. The sound seems to come from deeper within the passage. The crew hesitates. Dara whispers that they should leave immediately. But the actor, drawn by something unseen, keeps walking forward. The cameraman follows, his breath quickening. They enter a vast chamber. The roof is lost in darkness, but massive stone columns rise up like tree trunks. At the center, illuminated by a single shaft of light from somewhere far above, is a shape. It's not clear, the footage is grainy here, but it seems to be a figure seated on a throne, not a statue. Something about it feels wrong for stone. Its surface moves, subtly, like skin under shadow. The actor steps toward it. The chanting grows louder. The camera shakes, and then a sharp, deafening noise, like an explosion, though muffled. The image blurs. Shouting, running, chaos. The last thing the reel shows is the camera tilting upward, catching a glimpse of something enormous moving just outside the beam of light, then black when the footage ends. The restoration team doesn't speak for several minutes. One of them takes off his headphones, rubbing his face as though trying to wake up from a nightmare. The historian paces in the corner, muttering that the imagery in the carvings doesn't match anything in Cambodian records. The journalist stares at the frozen final frame, the actor's silhouette in mid-step toward the throne. Only one thing is clear. This was no ordinary disappearance. The actor and his crew had found something deep in the jungle, something ancient, something not meant to be disturbed. And whatever it was, it had erased them from history. But the camera had survived. And now, 40 years later, the images it carried were forcing the world to confront a question no one knew how to answer. What had been waiting in those ruins all this time? And was it still there? The jungle was eerily quiet that morning. A blanket of mist clung to the treetops like a secret the earth refused to let go. The excavation site was nothing more than a patch of disturbed earth surrounded by men in sweat-soaked shirts and wide-brimmed hats, their hands trembling as they unearthed fragments from a forgotten time in the center of it all. The archaeologist, Dr. Vanik, knelt in the dirt, his fingers brushing away clumps of soil with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics, and in his hands was the camera. It was a battered, rusted piece of metal, its once glossy black paint now dulled to a ghostly grey. The lens was cracked, the leather strap frayed and crumbling to dust. Yet, despite for decades of weather, rot, and rain, it had survived. The moment felt unreal. For the small group gathered there, local villagers, a handful of Cambodian officials, and the foreign journalists who'd flown in after whispers of the find leaked, it was as if time had folded in on itself, and 1974 had come rushing back. They didn't just see a camera. They saw the ghost of Michael Weston, the Hollywood actor who had vanished into this very jungle at the height of his career. The news spread like wildfire. By the afternoon, international outlets were carrying the story. Missing actor's camera discovered in Cambodian jungle after 40 years. Social media feeds exploded with speculation. Some believed it was a hoax. Others swore it was the missing key to one of the entertainment industry's most enduring mysteries. But to those closest to the case, Michael's sister, Evelyn, his old co-star, David Carter, and the small circle of friends who had refused to let the story die. This was more than a headline. It was hope. The Cambodian government authorized the camera to be carefully transported to Phnom Penh for examination. Under the supervision of both local and foreign experts, the corroded casing was pried open, inch by painstaking inch. Every movement was deliberate. Every breath in the room held Dot inside. They found what everyone had been holding their breath for, a roll of film, 40 years in the jungle, yet somehow impossibly still intact. The film was rushed to a climate-controlled lab in Bangkok. Specialists worked in near darkness, their gloves moving with surgeon-like precision. The chemical smell of the developing process hung in the air as ghostly shapes began to emerge on the drying sheets. At first, they were just blurred shadows, faded jungle foliage, a smear of light dot, and then the first clear frame appeared. Was Michael, shirtless in the sweltering heat, grinning at the camera as he stood next to a weathered guide in a straw hat. Behind them, a curtain of vines hung from towering trees. His hair was damp with sweat, his face sunburned, but his eyes sparkled with the restless energy that had made him a star. The room fell silent. Photo after photo emerged. Michael crossing a narrow rope bridge. Michael sharing a meal with locals in a small riverside village. Michael standing beside a rusted riverboat under the fading light of dusk. The early frames told the story. Everyone expected a daring adventure into the Cambodian wilderness during a turbulent political era. But then, the tone of the images began to change. The jungle in the later photos seemed darker, denser. The smiles faded. In one frame, Michael looked directly into the lens, his expression tense, as if someone had called his name from just outside the shot. Another showed him crouched in the undergrowth, pointing toward something indistinct in the distance, a blurred figure, partially obscured by leaves. And then came the most disturbing image of all. It was grainy and underexposed, but clear enough to make out the fear in Michael's eyes. He was on the ground, half turned toward the camera, his hands raised as though warding something off. In the background, shadowy shapes seemed to emerge from the trees, human, but indistinct. The frame ended in motion blur. The roll stopped there. When the images were made public, they ignited a storm. Some insisted the shapes in the trees were just tricks of light. Others claimed they were armed men, remnants of rebel factions, or opportunistic bandits operating in the chaos of Cambodia's civil war. There were whispers of something darker. Local legends of forest spirits that ensnared those who wandered too far from safe paths. Elders in nearby villages spoke of cursed trails and places where even the birds refused to sing. But the most plausible theory was also the most chilling. Michael Weston, lost deep in an unstable region at a time when foreign travelers were seen as potential bargaining chips, had encountered people who did not want to be found, and who ensured he never was. For Evelyn Weston, the photographs were both a blessing and a curse. Seeing her brother's face again after 4 decades was like being reunited and bereaved all at once. She held each print with trembling fingers, tracing the lines of his smile, memorizing the curve of his jaw, and yet there were no final answers. No proof of what had happened after that last blurred frame. Still, Evelyn decided she had to go. To Cambodia herself. She stood in the same village where Michael had once shared a meal, walked the same narrow rope bridge, and listened to the distant calls of unseen birds echoing through the canopy. Locals told her they remembered a tall foreign man with bright eyes who passed through years ago. But beyond the village, their stories turned to silence. Some refused to speak at all. At the site where the camera was found, Evelyn knelt in the damp earth, pressing her hand to the ground as if she might feel some trace of her brother's presence. The camera now rests in a climate-controlled glass case in a museum in Phnom Penh. Its rusted frame a silent witness to whatever happened in those last days of Michael's life. The photographs are displayed alongside it, a sequence of frozen moments that have fueled documentaries, books, and endless online debates. And though the mystery has not been solved, something shifted the day the camera was found. Michael Weston was no longer just a face on a missing poster. He was a man who had walked deep into the heart of the jungle, laughed with strangers, crossed rivers, and faced something in those shadows that we may never fully understand. In the last known photograph, Michael is staring into the camera. Behind him, the jungle looms like a living wall. His mouth is slightly open, as if caught mid-sentence. His eyes sharp, intense, almost pleading, seem to lock on whoever looks at the image. For those who have studied the photo closely, there is a feeling that he's trying to tell us something. that in the split second before the shutter clicked, he knew it might be the last picture he'd ever take. And perhaps that's why the camera endured, buried, forgotten, yet waiting to be found. Because maybe some stories refuse to stay hidden. Maybe some voices keep calling, even through 40 years of silence, and in the rusted frame of a forgotten camera, the final frame of Michael Weston still speaks.